Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Discovery Season 3, Episode 5, Die Trying. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Discovery, so I have to start with a spoiler warning for Discovery up to Season 3, Episode 5. If you haven't seen up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So, I gotta say, this is probably my favorite episode of the season so far, and I do realize, I am aware that I'm pretty much saying that every week. What that means is that the episodes are getting better. I mean, not by a lot, mind you, because I pretty much gave every episode this season except the first one the same rating, which, spoiler warning, I'm going to do for this episode too. So it's not like they're getting way better, but I think in small increments they're getting better, which is exactly what you want, because if it gets way better, then it's probably going to go down from there, where it's just inching up slightly. That actually bodes well for the season. Hopefully they continue to do so this way. So in this episode, we see Discovery finally find Starfleet, and I touched a bit about this last week, so I won't get too much into it this week. That I'm loving the pacing of the season so far. I love how if they have a goal, they instantly get there. They don't dick around like some other shows like Enterprise in their third season. As much as I love season 3 of Enterprise, they're like, oh, we gotta go to Zadi Prime, and it takes them 4 episodes to get there. We're here. And Discovery Season 2 did that as well. Spock, we're looking for Spock for 8 episodes? But here, this season, is we have a mission, boom, we're there. And I love that pacing, and I think it's serving them really well. And I love how they kind of teased Discovery searching for Starfleet and the Federation enough. They mentioned it since episode 2. Or at least episode 3. And I think I'm glad that they didn't put it off longer. That here's Starfleet. And here's the thing, we get so Discovery enters this little hub, and then they have this glory shot, a hero shot, where everyone's all in awe, and they're looking at all the different ships, and how there's this huge bubble thing created by all the ships, and all the new designs, and everyone's ooh, ah, ooh, ah. It reminded me a bit of the scene from Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, when Enterprise went back to the Starbase, which is the first time we've ever seen in any Star Trek material, an actual Starbase thing, and everyone was looking at the Excelsior. I was ooh, that's a new ship. Of course, this scene was that scene on steroids. It was much worse. But here's the thing, or better, depending, it's just greater. But here's the thing, that's appropriate, because this ship traveled 1,000 years into the future, so of course they're going to be completely in awe of the new technology. And it does make sense that the technology, they describe all this weird, new technology. And this is 1,000 years in the future. In fact, if it wasn't for the burn, where you assume it was a huge setback technologically wise, and, you assume that technology would have advanced a lot more if it wasn't for the burn. So if it wasn't for the burn, I would say this technology is not advanced far enough. I mean, just think about that. 1,000 years, because the time between the original series and the Next Generation is 100 years. And just in 100 years, technology had advanced so much, and the Federation Starfleet changed so drastically. That's 100 years. 1,000 years, the change should be unrecognizable. Which it partly is because of the burn, because Starfleet is so condensed and reduced now. But technology-wise, it should have been way more advanced. But the burn kind of justifies it, because not only did the advancement stop, it actually regressed a bit, which makes sense. So I actually love this scene. I think it's very appropriate, and I like how the crew of Discovery were crowded around the windows. I like scenes like that because it reinforces, and this is something I think a lot of previous Star Trek shows didn't do enough, probably for budget reasons. It shows shots of the rest of the crew reacting to stuff, because it reinforces the fact that the crew is more, that the ship of Discovery is more than just the bridge crew, that there's a whole crew manning the ship, and to see them all staring out the windows and all, and like, oh my god, look at that. I thought it was very appropriate, and I thought had they not played it like that, that it would be inappropriate. I think so. I think they played the scene exactly as they needed to. Now, as far as when Burnham and Saru actually go to Starfleet and they meet the Admiral, and he's very sort of standoffish and it's like, well, I don't trust your story, and it's talking about breaking up the crew. I have several thoughts on this, both positive, to be clear. I think that, for one, I mean, they have to do this from a narrative structure point of view. They have to do it this way, because if they just go on board the Starfleet and Starfleet is like, oh, hi, give them hugs, how's it going? Everything works out fine. That's not very interesting from a narrative perspective, from a storytelling perspective. And before you go bashing that, a lot of Star Trek has done that in the past. I mean, why do you think admirals always turn out to be assholes? Because it creates tension. It's good for narrative story structure. I mean, if you look back as Starfleet as a whole, and I've seen some people do this where they examine all the admirals, and how come admirals tend to be assholes, and you look at it from that perspective. But that's a consequence of storytelling, because storytelling, if the admiral is like all great and nice, then doesn't create tension. It's not very interesting from a storytelling perspective. But on the other hand, from an in-universe perspective, I also think it makes total and complete sense that he would be standoffish and wouldn't trust him, because this is a ship from 1,000 years in the past, where of course he explained the whole issue with time travel and how that was a big thing and how it's not allowed because it led to the temporal wars, which nearly caused the destruction of the entire timeline. So people don't look on at time travel very kindly now. So that right there, like, made them very weary that seeing a ship that had traveled 1,000 years from the past. But on the other hand, like the historical records and everything show that Discovery was destroyed, and they'd never heard of a spore drive. They've never heard of control. So for Saru and Burnham to come on board and tell them all this shit that contradicts what 1,000 years of history tells them would be a hard pill to swallow. And so I completely understand the Admiral's point of view and the stance that he takes. And I think it makes total sense. I think this was actually done really well. And I think the conflict between Burnham and the Admiral made sense. In fact, if I may be so bold, I think the Admiral's portrayal here was less dickish than a lot of other Admirals we've got throughout the Star Trek universe. Nechayev! Excuse me. Not even to get into some of the worst ones, like who's that? Well, Commodore Decker, or who's that other? Oh, Admiral Pressman, of course, from the Pegasus. Yeah, so not even getting that far. Just your standard Starfleet Admiral. He's actually not as dickish as most of them are, and I think his adversarial stance and behavior was completely understandable. In fact, had he been, oh yeah, sure, come on, Discovery, we need your help, I wouldn't have bought that. That would have been fake to me. I think this is a hell of a lot more realistic and true to Star Trek and the storytelling standpoint. So not only does it make sense from a storytelling perspective, it also makes sense from an in-universe perspective that they would be standoffish and had this adversarial attitude. Now, as far as the guy wanting to, like, split up the Discovery crew and, like, reassign them everywhere and put other people in Discovery, like, there's a slight bit of that is a bit sort of, okay, this is to raise the stakes. But also there's a slight bit of, I think that makes sense from an in-universe perspective as well. That if he is sort of weary of the ship and the crew, he sees that the ship itself, the technology, is a huge asset to them. And it's probably the biggest asset they have. It kind of makes sense that he would want people he trusts operating it, not some random people who he just met who had this fantastical story that doesn't jive with history. Now, jumping ahead to the ending, where he does let Discovery go and keeps the crew together, they weren't very clear. I'm thinking, did he send some of his own men to go with them? Because if he didn't, then I wouldn't buy that he would trust them oh so 100% completely just because of the events of this episode, they'd be willing to just let them go off on their own. I mean, granted, like the Observer observed that the whole thing was Stamets, Tilly, and Jet Reno, which I thought was kind of funny how they were all being bitchy and snarky with each other, and they said that's part of why they worked so well together. Like, granted, the Observer did make that observation that the crew worked well on its own, probably contribute to why he kept the crew together. Still doesn't make me think that he would trust them, like, 100% implicitly. So anyway, the point is that I love this whole storyline with them meeting Starfleet and their interaction, the tension between them, and the trust and how Burnham had and Discovery crew had to prove themselves to Starfleet. I think that really worked. In fact, this is on track to being one of my favorite episodes of the entire show, and I was on track for me to give it a much higher rating than I will. But then they get into the other storyline, which I don't hate. I didn't think sucked. I didn't think it was bad. I just thought it was a little bit rushed. But before I get to that, I want to talk about this scene where Burnham comes to Saru with this plan to like go behind Starfleet's back, go behind the Admiral's back to prove themselves, to like slip away and steal like the information so they can save the alien species' life, and like, oh, we're gonna prove that we're great. That was a really stupid plan, and I'm so glad that Saru shot it down. Although I do think it's kind of bad writing that Burnham would even suggest that, because that plan is very sort of sitcom-ish. It's like a sitcom kind of thing where like it's a very contrived Hollywood script writing. Put it that way, where there's someone's like, oh, let's go behind their back and break the rules so we can prove that we're great. All that would prove to the Admiral is that they can't be trusted, and they would just piss them off. Even if they save the alien species' life, they're like, "We're a great job saving the aliens, but you just proved to us that you can't be trusted and you're deceitful. So we're splitting up the crew. Fuck you." Now, on the one hand, though, they do kind of lay the work how it's in Burnham's character to suggest something like that, where it sort of calls back to the whole her mutiny thing way back in the very pilot episode, and how she has that tendency to break rules to get what she wants, which is actually very indicative of the time period that she's from, like the whole Kirk era. I mean, that's what all Kirk was about, was breaking the rules in order to get things done. But Saru kind of says, oh, I would have thought you would have learned by now that kind of behavior doesn't work. And I agree with Saru, and that's why I think it's kind of bad writing for Burnham to even suggest that, because she should know better by now. But it's don't get me wrong, it's not like I had a huge issue. I thought it was wildly out of character for her. Nothing like that. It's just a very minor thing for me. But anyway, so the other plot we get with the Barzans having this sort of archive of the Federation and being caretakers of it, and Narn, Nan, I believe her name is, whatever her name is. Anyway, she being on board and getting sort of homesick or whatever when she's there, and sort of that whole storyline with the guy whose children died, but because of his culture he can't accept it, and he's like, I don't think that was a bad storyline. I just think it was a little bit rushed. I think that they spent too much time at Starfleet, which, to be fair, they needed to spend that time. If they spent any less time at Starfleet, then I thought it wouldn't work as well. But I think the problem comes in is trying to do both storylines in the same episode. I just don't think there's enough time for that. And so the one storyline, is one with the archive ship, kind of got underplayed a bit. They kind of rushed through it. And again, I'm not saying it totally sucked. It was completely rushed through. Like it's nowhere near a Game of Thrones season 8 type scenario. Nowhere near. But it was a slightly bit rushed through. It did seem like I didn't give me enough sort of time to sort of really feel connected or to care that much of this particular guy's plight or this particular storyline. And I think maybe they sort of hit a bit too much hard on Detmer's sort of PTSD, that she is starting to become a liability. When I was saying I hope they flesh out her character more, I didn't mean like make her a liability. I hope they find other ways to flesh out her character. But anyway, and the whole thing with the security chief, Don or whatever, this seemed like a very obvious way for the writers to get rid of her. I mean, they bring in the possibility of her coming back. Just like, oh, maybe we'll meet again. So she could be one of those reappearing guest stars that, like Q or whatever, Barkley, that appears once every couple of seasons or whatever. But but regardless, it seemed like a very obvious, contrived way for the writers. Like, yeah, we don't really want her to be a main character anymore. Let's get rid of her. And it's kind of, you know what? It reminded me a lot of the way that the Voyager staff wrote Neelix off the show by saying, oh, here's some Talaxians so you can hang out with your own kind, even though that made zero sense. And to be fair, this episode actually makes more sense than that. Because they were like 50 years travel away from any Talaxians. But anyway, I'm getting off topic. So it does make more sense that, you know, she would run into other Barzans, and that would make her homesick and make her want to actually see her home world again, whatnot. But it just, the whole, again, this probably has to do with the rushed nature of the storyline. It felt like a very sort of rushed way. Oh, I'm staying behind. So that they could write the character off the show, which makes me wonder, like, why not just leave her on the Enterprise? Why not just leave her behind in season 2? But maybe they hadn't decided that in season 2, but when they started putting season 3 together, they were like, we don't really like this character. She doesn't really fit into what we want to do, so let's find a way to write her off the show. Now, granted, it's probably better than simply killing her off, because she could make reappearances, as I said, and they sort of hinted at that, but still, it did feel like a very contrived way to get rid of her. Which, I mean, to be fair, like, after the whole yum thing in the finale I can't take her seriously anymore, so it's probably for the best that they get rid of her. What the hell is that? And they never really fully explored this character anyway, so I don't know. She kind of seems superfluous. Now I guess I gotta touch on the whole Georgiou thing with that weird old dude with the glasses, which I still don't understand who he is. Maybe that's meant to be a mystery. I kind of got, when she was like, oh, look at your badge, whatever, kind of got a hint that he had something to do with maybe a future version of Section 31. That's the vibe I'm getting, but I could be totally off about that. Yeah, I don't know. I've never been a huge fan of Georgiou, to be honest, and the way he was talking, like, why are you with the crew, does make me think he has a point. Like, why is she? Now, they answer the question later by saying, oh, it's because you care about someone on board, which is supposed to be Burnham, of course, and I don't know. I don't know, it doesn't seem that very strong of a reason. But how does this, if they lost contact with the Mirror Universe 500 years ago, how does he know that the Terran Empire fell? But I guess it fell before they lost contact with it. And the universe is going to push further apart. Does that mean they would lose all contact with it? I don't know. I don't know. That all seems like, I don't know. But whatever. I don't know. I'm very sort of iffy about this whole thing. And the fact that, like, Georgiou was like staring into space and Burnham's trying to get her attention. Is that hinting that that old dude like hypnotized her or has her brainwashed? I don't know. I really don't know. And they're still, like, from a production standpoint, they're still talking about doing a Section 31 show with Georgiou that takes place in the 23rd century. So that's always in my back of my mind. They're going to find some way to get her to go back in time again. But whatever. I don't know. So anyway, my rating for Die Trying, which seems like a too harsh of a title of the episode. They didn't really die trying. But anyway, my rating for Die Trying out of 10 is, as I alluded to earlier, an 8. Extremely good. It's really close to giving this episode a 9, but then I had to consider the rushed nature of the that storyline with the Barzan caretaker thing that was a bit rushed, so I did have to tick my rating down a bit. But it's still a really good episode. As I said, it's still probably my favorite of the season so far. I think the episodes just keep getting better and better. So I hope that we continue this upward tick until we get to a really grand finale. I hope so. And I think it's very interesting that they sort of left it off on a position of Discovery as part of Starfleet again now. That they answer to this Admiral guy and they're all on good terms. And things are kind of wide open. And I like how Burnham's still, of course, very interested in to find out what caused the burn, but the Admiral doesn't seem to give a shit. It's like, we have more pressing matters. And they also hinted at, like, this whole Orion and Dorian sort of being the big villains now, which is quite an interesting turn. I kind of like that. Of course, they hinted at this in the premiere episode where we actually saw them. So, yeah. So I'm very curious to see, even though it seems like almost it's not too much of a serialized at this point. It's like this is almost like an end point of sorts, but it's still very, of course, the whole issue with the burn and how will things progress, that it's tying everything together. So I like it. I love where this season's headed so far. I'm really enjoying the season more than I thought I would. So very curious to see where things will go for him here. Anyway, that is it for my review of Die Trying. So I shall be back next week and every week to continue my coverage of Star Trek Discovery, so be sure to check that out. Also check out my channel as I cover many more shows like The Expanse, more Star Trek, all kinds of Star Trek, BoJack Horseman, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.